Somewhere along the way, with all the helping, worrying, and protecting, we forget to care for and nurture ourselves. Taking care of oneself, especially for all mothers, has been so deprioritized that it has instinctive guilt feelings associated with it. Okay, shall we start? My name is Gopika Kapoor. I am a neurodiversity consultant. I'm also an author. I also am a parent advocate. I have 18-year-old twins, Vir and Gayatri, and Vir is on the autism spectrum. And when he was diagnosed, he was about 3 years old. And since then, it's been quite a journey. It's been about 15 years. I've gone from being a very scared, very confused, very fragile mother to someone who knows that she needs to advocate and speak up, not just for Vir, but for lots of other people like him. And that's what I've discovered is my life's mission to do. You know, I had never heard about autism. The only thing I had heard about was I had read this book, this fiction book long time ago, and one of the characters had an autistic son and talked about her journey and stuff like that. And it was a very nice book, but that was about it. And I think as a mom, you know, when you talk about mother's instinct, it was always at the back of my mind that something about this kid is different. And I had a point of comparison. I had my daughter. And, you know, people would say, oh, he's not responding as much, he's not as friendly as her, he's living in his own world. And I would get very defensive and say, what rubbish, it's not like that. And, you know, kind of get really angry with those people. But I think at the back of my heart, literally, I knew that this is something which is true. I knew that there was something which was different about him. And then Tare Zameen Par came out and there was all this talk about dyslexia. And so I went into, I realized I was reading about the symptoms and I said, okay, you know, these match Vir's. And so I made an appointment. I said, okay, I think I need to go and see somebody. And my brother's a doctor. And I told him, I said, you know what? I think Vir is dyslexic. I think the symptoms match him. And he said, I've been meaning to tell you for a while that I think that he's not developing in the way that typical kids do. And my heart just went cold when he said that. But I said, okay, he's going to be dyslexic and, you know, he's going to be like the kid in Tare Zameen Par and it'll be fine. Everything will be okay. And, you know, I kind of consoled myself with that. And then I still remember the date, 4th of January, 2008. We had an appointment at 9 o'clock in the morning, got lost and reached the clinic at Umeed Child Development Center and walked in, and Dr. Vibha Krishnamurthy, who is now such a close friend and my mentor and guide, did the diagnosis. And she told us he has autism. And it was just like, after that, it was all a blur. It was just a complete blur. I don't remember much. I remember sitting in that taxi and I remember both me and my husband just crying. And I just kept looking at him and saying, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? We had no idea what we were going to do. And that whole day, it was just a blur of like, what the hell are we going to do? What is life going to be like? And I kept looking at him and thinking, this is the same kid who went to sleep last night and he was fine. And how does he suddenly got autism now? You know, and that whole kind of stigma, in a sense, that society has of, you are the mother of an autistic child. I mean, I couldn't even bring myself to say autistic, but a kid who has autism, it took a long time. I would go to sleep at night and then I'd wake up in the morning, and for that 1 second I would think, you know, everything's okay in my life, and then I would remember. And this went on for a long time. It went on for a very long time. It was very, very hard. You know, those 5 stages of grief, I went through all of them. denial. I used to keep saying that, oh, my son doesn't have autism. He's got Asperger's syndrome, which is Asperger's syndrome is basically a kind of, a condition or a label given to, again, autism, but where the kids are more verbal, their IQ is higher and things like that. So I would cling to this Asperger's syndrome kind of thing. Then, of course, we tried everything, went to a faith healer. The faith healer said he's got something called basal ganglia. I said, oh, he doesn't have autism, he's got basal ganglia. I didn't realize basal ganglia is a part of the brain. And there is no such thing like having basal ganglia. Everybody has a basal ganglia, but, so we clung to that for the longest time. Went to a past life regressionist who told me that his life and my life has been intertwined across lifetimes, which I can tell you, considering the connection I have with him, I'm pretty sure it's intertwined. And she said, you have to undo the past trauma and something like that. And finally, it took years and years and years, even after I started working at Umeed, because I really felt such a tremendous sense of privilege, and I felt I needed to give back. Even then, I could not accept, I would not tell my patients' parents that they'd say, what have you done? You've done masters in psychology. And I would say, yes, I've done a master's in psychology. I would not tell them that I was the mom of a kid who was like theirs for many, many, many years. So it took a long time. And during that time, there was denial initially. There was lots of anger. Oh my God. I was really you had Amitabh Bachchan was angry young man. I was angry young woman. Really. I was just angry all the time. I was angry. It was obviously unprocessed grief in a sense, and there's a very beautiful term for it. It's called accidental grief, because people feel that you do not have the right to grieve over a child who is diagnosed with autism or is diagnosed with any kind of disability, because your child is there, right? So the parents who've lost their children feel, what are you grieving over? Your child is alive. But there is that kind of accidental grief. You do grieve because you feel that your life is headed in one way, but it suddenly takes a very sharp U-turn and it's headed in a completely different way after that. And I think that when I wrote my book and I had reached that point after, it's been 15 years now, and when I wrote the book, it was about 12 years. It had taken me that long to be able to tell my story. It was to tell parents that it's okay to grieve, but you know what? Your life is going to be very, very different. It's going to be very different from what you kind of envisioned, but it's not going to be a bad life. It'll still be a good life. You'll still laugh. You'll still experience joy. You'll still have good times. It'll just be different. So all the emotions, lots of bargaining, like I said, all these faith healers and past life regressionists and stuff like that. Lots of sadness, lots and lots and lots of sadness, lots of crying without knowing why I was crying, lots of, just breaking down, just thinking, what the hell am I going to do with the rest of my life? What am I going to do? How am I going to take care of this kid? How is it going to happen? And finally, reaching that stage of acceptance. And I would say that writing Beyond the Blue took me one step further of reaching a stage of appreciation, because I think that through the whole catharsis of writing the book, I reached a stage where I could look at my son through new eyes, and I honestly fell in love with him all over again. I was just like, wow, just look how far he's come. Look at what an amazing kid he is. And I think that really completed that circle that I had traveled of reaching that stage of complete appreciation for him. Our life before the diagnosis was like, we were like this picture perfect family. Firstly, when you tell people you've got twins and a boy and a girl, they're like, "Arey wah, complete family ho gaya." It's like this kind of cliched Indian thing of having a boy and a girl. It's, you got two for the price of one kind of thing, all those kind of cliches. And we really were this very picture perfect family. We would take our kids out. It was like, wow, look at them, the boy and a girl, and how lucky she is, she's got twins and stuff like that. There was a little bit of, I felt, under the surface there was tension, because I think both of us knew that there was something up with Vir. Gayatri was much more outgoing, much friendlier, and would get a lot of attention. And Vir would kind of be ignored. And this really used to bother me. It used to really bother me. And I would keep fighting and saying, people aren't giving him attention and things like that. And I think that stress really kind of crept into our relationship a little bit, because in a sense, it was almost that why is it not as perfect as it looks, and there was a pressure almost to have it be as perfect as it looks. And then Vir's diagnosis happened, and it was really, really hard, because I remember that time the kids were 3. Mohit had the year before set up his own firm. So he was he had to build his practice, and therapy costs a lot of money. You have to be able to earn to pay for that therapy. I was not working because I had these kids. And so I, would spend time taking Vir to therapy and stuff like that. And I was permanently stressed, permanently exhausted. He was stressed and exhausted because he was building up his practice. Plus there was, Vir's autism. And so it was very, very hard. It was really hard. And then when Vir was 5.5, which was about two years after his diagnosis, I started working as a therapist at Umeed. I trained to be a therapist. And so what tended to happen was that I would work with Vir, and I really, really worked hard with him. And Mohit would come back at the end of the day and I'd say, you know what? You don't have time to spend with him. Spend time with him. So then he would spend time with him. And when he was spending time with him, I would say, that's not the way you do it. I've learned that this is the way you do it. And so I would tell him, don't talk like this, talk like this, or play like this. And so that really caused a lot of tension. I think also men fathers find it very hard to process feelings about a child with a disability. And so I think while I had women who I could talk to, I had my work, which I think really helped me a lot, because I was seeing and working with autistic kids and their families. And I think somehow that, it worked, my own emotions worked themselves out, because I was helping other kids and their families. And Mohit didn't have that. He's a lawyer. It's a very black and white world. It's a world which is, all about work and the law, and there are all these kind of very concrete kind of things which go on in his world. And here was my world. And at some point of time, it became very evident that there was this huge disconnect kind of happening. And especially because I would say, why aren't you playing with Vir? Of course, Gayatri was easier to play with. Of course, it was easier to play with her. Vir was very hard to connect with initially. I would find it so hard to connect with him. And we tried lots of things. But it was really hard to get that connection, which is what, later on I would explain to families, that the connection is the most important thing. Forget about the reading, writing and stuff. You have to have that connection with your child. So it was really, really hard for a while. I think we went through our extreme lows, and then we slowly started, kind of building our connection with him, with each other again. I think there was no doubt about the fact that we were a team, but we were a team where two players were playing their own goals in that sense. But it took a while to rebuild that connection. It took a while to for him to really, really reach that stage of acceptance, for me to understand that he can play with him or be with him in his own way, and I can be with Vir in my own way, and there's no wrong and right. And eventually, I have to say, 15 years later, it's lovely to see the connection that father and son have. They've got a really strong bond. They're very, very close to each other, and it's really a very sweet thing. So when I found out I was having twins, my first reaction was, oh shit, what the hell am I going to do? How am I going to manage these two kids? It was a great pregnancy. I mean, I was on bed rest for most of the time, but when they were born, it was like, you know, it was just incredible. I remember we were in the hospital, and we were told to keep them in two separate cots, and she bawled all night. And the minute I took her home and put her in the same cot as her brother, she was quiet. And it was really, really sweet to see. When they were growing up, they used to play, and it was really, I mean, it was a wonderful thing to see. And then, of course, we got Vir's diagnosis, and they were developing at slightly different rates and in different ways. And I think from the beginning, both Mohit and I were very conscious of the fact that because they are twins, they have to have separate time with us, and we have to have separate time with each one. So we would do lots of special days, and you know, if one we would make one bunk school when they were really little, and the other one would go to school, and we'd spend time with that kid and stuff like that. So we do a lot of that kind of stuff. And then when Vir's diagnosis happened, it was, of course, there was a lot of stress in the house. It was very, very difficult. And I think the one thing that I'm very, very proud of us as parents for is that through that, we still kept that balance between the two. It's not easy for a lot of people. It's not at all easy, but we did it. We managed to do it. We made sure that Vir and Gayatri got enough attention for a lot of the time. Having said that, there were sometimes when Vir's needs really took precedence over Gayatri's. You know, sometimes kids with autism, for them, certain routines are fixed. Certain things have to be in a certain way. And initially, of course, now fortunately Vir has learned to be very flexible because we've taught him to be that way. But initially, if like something was changed, so for example, if they were eating from a blue plate and a green plate, and Vir had always eaten from the green plate, if I gave Gayatri the green plate, there would be a huge meltdown. And having to deal with that took a lot of my energy, it took a lot of time, and Gayatri would then be left by herself. And I remember this one incident very clearly. We had gone to Dubai to see my sister who lived there. We had gone to IKEA, and you know, IKEA is, I think, an autistic child's nightmare. As much as it is my dream, it is really an autistic child's nightmare because there's big lights, it's huge, it's never ending, there's lots of noise, you know, those tube lights and stuff like that. And he had, I think, after 2 hours of shopping, I don't know how he managed to sustain for 2 hours, but he had just lost it and had the mother of all meltdowns. And he cried and cried and cried and cried. And remember, in the car, we were trying to pacify him. And then went back home. I was really irritated because my shopping was left halfway. We were trying to calm him down, this, that, you know, it was just really crazy. And Gayatri just sat down. She was very quiet. And I sat with her and I told her, I said, are you okay? And she said, you know, and she was crying. And she said, I wish he'd never been born. And I said, oh my God, you know, I mean, it's very hard to hear that. It's very, very hard. And so I said, I just didn't know what to say. I just held her. I just held on to her and I said, it's okay, you can cry. And, you know, I couldn't be angry with her for that. At the same time, I couldn't be angry with him because I knew what he was dealing with. So it was really hard. I think at some point of time after that, you know, we had been going on about twin and stuff like that. And after some time, one day, I don't know, something, she was complaining about him. And I said, you know what? Think of him as your younger brother. And that is when one tube light went off in her head, because it was just like, wow, okay, you know, he's my younger brother. And so I have to protect him, I have to look after him, and I have to kind of take care of him. And since then, I mean, it's not that they don't fight, they still fight, they still argue, but she has really emerged as his biggest protector. She is his best friend. He makes fun of her. They have a very kind of normal relationship as siblings. They tease each other, they irritate each other, they fight. He talks to her things which I want her to tell him. I'll say, just ask him now if he's okay, and kind of get this information out of him. So it's really sweet. It's really cute. They're very close. She's written a book of poems, and she's written this amazing poem on him called The Blue Boy, where she's written about him. And she's really like his. Sometimes I'll get angry with him and she'll say, Mama, now stop, he's not done anything. Now why are you getting angry with him? Just let him be, so she'll stand up for him. And he's really been a huge influence on her life. She's going off to college. She wants to study psychology, and she says, maybe I want to do research in autism. And I'm like, okay, fine, where is this coming from? But I know where it's coming from. So he's been a huge influence on her life. And she says that I would not want anything any other way, because he is my brother. And he's impacted her life so hugely, as he has all of ours. So she really wouldn't have it any other way. I think if you ask any autism parent, what is the one thing that you want for your child, they'll say it's a friend. And because it is such a socially isolating condition, I think any family who's kind of got a kid who's autistic thinks there has not been a time when they haven't thought twice about taking that child to a mall or a birthday party or a wedding or something like that, because they just wonder what that child is going to do. It's very hard, because your heart is breaking for your child when they are not accepted by their peers, and the only thing you want for them is a friend. I remember this one incident very clearly. We had gone to a friend's child's birthday party. Vir had taken his tray with the dosa and idli and whatever, and there was this group of boys and they were sitting on this table, and he very sweetly went over there and he said, and I was watching this, from the corner of my eye, and he went over there and he said, can I sit down, or something like that. And that boy said, no, you can't, get lost. And I just went to pieces. He went and he took his plate and he sat down somewhere else, and he continued to eat his dosa and idli like nothing happened. But I had to leave that party because I was in tears, and I just left and I stood outside for 15 minutes just sobbing because it's a very small incident, but he was being rejected. And for me, it was even worse than any kind of rejection that I have faced, to just have your child go and very sweetly go to this group and say, can I just sit here, and be told, get lost. It was horrible. It was just absolutely heartbreaking. I remember another incident where he was part of, there was this one coach, and all the kids were, going to the coach, and they had some athletics class or something like that. And I said, my son, I want my son to join, and I just want to tell you that, he has autism. And so he said, first question was, what does that mean? So I said, okay. I said, he has special needs. He may not communicate and may not be able to tell you, but he's very smart. He understands everything. He'll follow instructions. He'll do what you tell him, everything. And the coach said, okay. He was very hesitant. I could make out from his face. And he said, okay, let's try it out. And then at the end of the class, he said, madam, we cannot keep your son in our class. He doesn't follow instructions. He doesn't do this. He doesn't do that. And just to have that coach just tell me that, and to have to be able to listen to that coach. I think if I was in that position now, I would tell the coach, I'm sorry, you have to give it a shot and you better do this and keep my kid there. But I was not empowered then. I was really so fragile. Anybody would say something to me and I would burst into tears. And so I said, okay, fine. And I just took him away. And it was so heartbreaking. It was so heartbreaking to be able to do that. I'm really happy to say that since then, I've tried to push for social opportunities. I would hate to have play dates, because any kid who would come home, after some time, the kid would be playing with Gayatri and Vir would be sitting in one corner. And I would just say, Gaya, please help, involve him. And she said, Mama, but he doesn't want to play with us. What can we do? And I would feel so horrible. So I would stop calling kids home, because even though it was something which therapists told us to do at that time, that you should have play dates so that he can socialize, it was just too hard to watch him being isolated, and it was very, very hard. And it was slowly, I would, sometimes say, should we leave him at home? Should we take him out? And I'd say, no, have to expose him to things, have to take him out. So even if he would sit in a corner, it would be okay. I remember this one time we had gone for my cousin's son's wedding, and it was a Sangeet, and Veer loves a party. He loves dancing, but it was too much for him, and I could make out. So we sat outside in the corridor on the steps for half an hour, and we just sat there, and I just held his hand, and we just sat there. And then Mohit came over and took over and sat and with him for the next half an hour till he got himself together. And then we went back into the party and he danced. But we had to do these things, and it's very hard being a parent who has to miss the party and sit outside with your child while everybody else is kind of dancing and having fun. I think even for me as a mom, it was really hard, because when I was with Gayatri's friends, mothers, I was the parent of a neurotypical kid, and it was like, we could discuss things like art classes and stuff like that. And then when I was with Veer's classmates, mothers, all we were discussing was therapy and diets and vitamin C therapy and this and that, and who's the latest and the best speech therapist in town. And so it was very, very difficult. And honestly, I think Veer is 18 and a half now. He entered a fantastic program last year when he was 17, where he's learning employability skills. I think that is when I came up for air. When he was 17 years old, after 17 years of being a mother, I could take a little bit of a step back and really kind of breathe and be able to not constantly be in a state of worry. My friends tell me, they say, you have no idea how much you've changed, because every time I would every time I would go out with them, I'd say, I have to rush home, because even Veer may be in school, but I had that worry at the back of my mind and that guilt that, I'm not at home. I need to be at home with the kids. Somehow fathers never have that. There is no such thing as father's guilt. Mothers only get lumped with this stupid mother's guilt. But it was really hard. I would not be able to, I think, fully be a friend to my friends, because I was constantly having to worry about my children, not having to worry, but I was constantly worried about my kids, about Veer. Will he be okay? Is everything going to be fine? I would get very defensive. I would get really, I would, defensive in a way that I would make my own defense mechanism, where if somebody tried to reach out to him and kind of involve him, I would say, no, these kids are not good enough. Forget it. They're not going to play. Because after some time, he would not be able to interact with them. I would, in my mind, cancel those people out. It would be like full cancel culture, that these people are not good because they don't kind of, interact with Veer or something like that. I would not think that, okay, I need to make him be able to understand so that he can interact. Yes, I would say these people are bad. I would just completely cancel them out. So it was very hard for me. I kind of isolated myself a lot as well. And it was very hard to be able to constantly carry that anger. Of course, there's that, nobody talks about it, but there is that jealousy when you look at other people's lives. My friends were going about their lives, they were partying, they were going on holidays, they were, they would go to brunch at 12 o'clock and come home at 6 o'clock. Here I would be at 3:30 saying, come on, let's go home. I have to be home for the kids. Why? Because I just have to be home. So those kind of things, where I would put these limitations on myself, but because I think mentally I was just not able to relax. And so really it's been 17, after 17 years that I've reached a place in my life where I'm able to do things for myself. I can take a step back. I can enjoy my time by myself. And I'm really so grateful and so happy that Vir has found a peer group. He goes and travels independently by cab. He goes for movies. He is going to see Barbie day after tomorrow with his friends. He goes to music concerts. He goes to restaurants, orders independently. Starbucks is his favorite. I don't know why. Goes out. He's loves dancing. He just had a rocking dance party on Saturday night with his friends. Came home at 1 o'clock in the morning. I never thought I'd see the day where my autistic teenager would come home at 1 o'clock with his friends after dancing the night away. And I am so grateful for that. And it's just such a wonderful feeling to see him completely happy, accepted in a space where he's got friends, where he just can be himself, and where they accept him as he is, who he is, and he's just having the time of his life. I think it's really hard to find people who are empathetic to you when your child is crying while traveling or in any kind of public place. I remember this very clearly when Vir was really, really young. We had gone somewhere and we were on the plane ride back, and he cried and cried and cried and cried. And I was trying so hard to comfort him, so hard to just make him stop crying. And everybody was turning and looking at me. And it's horrible when, you have like everybody on that bus or plane or whatever just turning and all these eyes looking at you. And of course, the judgment is you are a bad mother. You have done something to make this child cry like this. Otherwise, why would the child cry? If you were a good mother, the child would not cry like that. So I think they're very, very judgmental towards mothers. I think we need to all just have a lot more empathy. I remember cut to earlier this year, I was in Singapore with my daughter. We were taking a flight back to Bombay, and we were in the waiting area before boarding the plane. And this woman came in, and she had a child who was crying, and I could make out, myself included. I looked at the child and I was like, oh God, a bawling child. This is a typical reaction that we all have. If you have a crying child on the plane, you've had it. And then I sat down, and everybody was looking at this mother and giving her dirty looks. And I sat and I just looked at this child. And my daughter said, Mama, what are you looking at? I said, this child is not just crying like that. This is something else. So I got up and I went to the woman, and I said, and she looked at, and when she looked at me, I could see her first look, like that reaction on her face was, oh my God, she's come to tell me off about my child. And I just looked at her and I smiled and I said, can I help you? And she said, thank you so much. That's so kind of you. She's a special needs child. I said, I know, she's got autism. I've also got a child who's got autism. And the relief on her face, I'm not saying this to say, wow, look at me, I'm so great. But just that fact, I wish somebody had come and told me this on the plane, I wish someone had said, it's okay. And I said, she must have had a really hard flight. She said, I've come from Sydney to Singapore, and she cried the entire flight because her ears were hurting. People don't realize that kids with autism have a lot of sensory difficulties. And this poor kid must have had so much pressure on her ears, it must have been driving her bananas. And she said, everyone on that flight was shouting at me. And my heart just broke. I said, should we do something about it? She said, what can we do? I said, come, let's go talk to the officials. So I said, do you want me to talk or do you want to talk? So she said, no, I'll talk. So I came with her and I just stood over there. And she said, I have a child with special needs. Can you do something? And those Singaporean people, very, they were, the airlines, they are very kind of strict about these things. But they said, okay, we'll let you board last. So she said, they let me board last, thank God. So I said, listen, don't worry, it'll be fine. And then she got on, I boarded first and she got on after me. And I said, listen, I'm sitting right here, call me if there's anything. And fortunately, that child, poor thing, must have been so exhausted. She slept throughout the flight, and it was okay. And she was fine throughout the flight, and then she finally made it back. But I cannot even imagine what that mother went through. Just yesterday, I was walking somewhere and there was this girl on a bus stop and she was in tears and throwing herself on her father, and her father was holding her. And what was so lovely to see is all the other people on the bus stop were surrounding this father and saying, Ami kai karu ka, madad karu ka, can we help, kuch kar sakte hain. And it was so sweet. I was so happy to see that. And we need these little pockets of people to become more and more and more. The first reaction we have is impatience. We don't kind of make any room for anyone who's slightly different. We are not perfect. All of us have something or the other that is different about us. We are certainly not perfect in terms of our personalities, our temperaments, our behaviors, especially as Indians. I mean, I can point out so many things that we do which is not perfect, but we expect everyone around us to behave perfectly. We expect everyone around us to behave in a way that fits in with the norm. I think as a society, we really need to make room for people who are different from us, because everybody has a right to exist. And just because somebody is different from you does not mean that they do not have the right to exist in the same space as you, because for them, you are different from the way they are. And whatever this kind of difference is, we just need to make room for it. We need to take a slight step back. Everyone talks about kindness and mindfulness and empathy. These are these token terms which people are going around tom-tomming about and, filling in LinkedIn pages about how I am mindful and I'm empathetic and things like that. But we need to really start practicing it. I mean, all it takes is just a little pause. All it takes is giving somebody the benefit of the doubt that maybe this person is doing something because of a particular way. So instead of, like, for example, everyone shouting at this woman on the plane, just take some time to just observe this child. Just see that this child is in obvious distress and is crying, not to make everybody else's life miserable, but because that child is experiencing something, that child is feeling something, and which is outside of your understanding, and so is crying like that. No child will cry for fun. No child wants to make their parents' life miserable. No child cries because it's fun to cry. Nobody wants to feel like that. And so there is a reason why this child might be acting in a particular way. And I think we just need to be able to understand and make room for that. When Vir was diagnosed, I used to take him for therapy every week. And when I was sitting and in the waiting room at Umeed, I would meet all sorts of people. People would come in with their kids. They would come in from all over the city, all over the country. People from different backgrounds. And of course, you start talking and you realize that how very, very lucky I realized I was. How privileged I was. I did not have to worry about how I paid for therapy. I did not have to worry about how I came to the center. I came in a car. I did not have to navigate public transport. I did not have to brave the rains or the heat. I did not have to worry about putting food on the table because I was bringing my child for therapy. And that realization made me very aware of the fact that I needed to do something to give back. I'd worked with NGOs in the past, and so at that time, Umeed was looking for someone to do fundraising, and I had worked in fundraising in the past. And so I said, okay, this is something that I will do. Again, I was still quite fragile. I was still not a very empowered parent, and so it became very hard for me to do the fundraising. But I would watch therapists while they worked with kids, and I realized that a lot of what they were doing was stuff that I was reading about and trying to do with Vir at home. And so I very hesitantly went and spoke to Vibha, who heads Umeed, and I said, look, I want to become a therapist. And she said, okay, fine, because the team did not have so many therapists at that time. And so that's how this whole journey began. And 10 years, I worked with kids, all kinds of families. And every single time, I was so grateful for what they taught me, for all that I learned about autism, the condition, how brains function, how differently it manifests in different kids and different people. And then when I quit Umeed in the beginning of 2020 was the time when I started writing my book, because I realized that everything that I had read was from the perspective of the West. And India is so different culturally, in terms of our families, in terms of our religion and superstitions, in terms of the food we eat, the family structures we have. And so I decided that I needed to write about it. I'd also reached that stage of my own acceptance of Vir and myself as an autism mom. And so I said, okay, I need to write about this. And so that's how Beyond the Blue was born. And I also realized that while there were services, I mean, ever since Vir was diagnosed to so many years later, services had crept up in Bombay, in metro cities, in smaller parts of the country, smaller towns and villages, where there were therapy services for kids with autism. But there was no kind of plan for what would happen after these kids became adults. It was like, would the autism go away? No, it wouldn't. So what do they do? And so I started talking about and writing about employment and how people should hire people who are autistic or neurodivergent. And so that's currently what I do now. I think for me, what an ideal world would look like is a world where all kinds of people who are different, whose brains are wired differently, to put it very simplistically, are accepted and given the opportunity to participate in every aspect of life, whether it is having a job, having an education, being able to navigate social spaces, being able to go to a mall, being able to go to a movie theater, to a nightclub, to have access to healthcare, have access to financial kind of resources and financial services, where society doesn't make it like like doing a favor to people who are neurodivergent or whose brains are wired differently. And it's not like, oh wow, we are doing this as a favor to you, look at us, we're so good. But it is part of just societal and systemic services that are offered to everybody. And this, I know, is a very idealized version. I mean, after all, the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act was amended in 2000, as late as 2016, to include autism. It didn't include autism before that. Only in 2016 was it changed from 7 disabilities to 21 disabilities, of which autism was one. So we have such a long way to go. I do see some changes happening in little pockets, but it's really not enough. It needs to be a lot more. But I think that is from the government perspective and the systemic perspective. We also need to change our attitudes. We also need to change our mindsets towards people with disabilities. We have this concept in India, which is pity. And pity is so often confused with sympathy and empathy. When you say empathy, people think it's pity. And they really say, oh, I really pity you. But what is there to be pitied? Don't pity the person, give them opportunities. Don't pity the person who's autistic and say, oh, I feel so bad for you and your life must be so difficult. Do something to make it better. And really, it doesn't take much to make it better. It's like, if you see somebody struggling with their autistic child, just see if you can help. see what you can do instead of just looking and giving dirty looks to that person. It's just involves just different kinds of shifts in your mindset of just being a little more empathetic, a little kinder ultimately, and a little more mindful. It involves being mindful about the way you talk. In India we have this horrible habit of saying, "Kya ye pagal hai?" What is pagal? You cannot label anybody who behaves differently as pagal or mad. It is they may have a kind of neurodevelopmental condition like autism, which makes them behave differently, but that does not mean that they are mad. It does not mean that they are less. They are different. And so just being a little more mindful about the way you talk, being mindful about the way you think, the way you act around people who are different, is also a large part of the kind of changes I would like to see. My ideal world is really a world where people who have neurological differences, people who are neurodivergent, who are autistic, are given the right to participate in every aspect of society and to participate wholeheartedly and really given a seat at the table so that they can live their life to their fullest potential.
What's your t-shirt story?
Oh, this is a t-shirt which actually has been designed by a friend of mine called Usaid Sheikh. He's this amazing young man with autism. He's a dancer and he's a graphic designer. He makes his own t-shirts, and he sent me this t-shirt, and I really love it because it says somebody with autism makes me proud every day, and I have Vir who really makes me proud every single day, and I love wearing this t-shirt.